Hello and welcome back to the Stupid Questions podcast. So, guys, today we're going to be talking with Ryan Bolton. He is the founder and head coach at Bolton Endurance Sports Training, also known as BEST, and he is also the USA Triathlon Director of High Performance. So he works with athletes such as Morgan Pearson, who you've heard of in the past, John Reed, and a number of others. And today's conversation is just a really great one. We talk about the background of Ryan, obviously a bit diving into what he's doing today and some philosophy around coaching, around life. Really good conversation. Really appreciated the candor and the pacing of the conversation as I asked questions. Ryan was really good about just expounding further on things that he's thinking. And so he made my job very easy today. If you want to check out any of the stuff that Ryan has going on, check out the show notes below. And also, if you would like to jump in and help plan out episode 200, check out the show notes for that. And yeah, thank you so much for being here. If you are watching or listening on any of the podcast platforms, such as YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, like, comment, subscribe, leave a review. All of those things continue to help grow this podcast. And I appreciate you being here and for listening and for doing those things. So thank you so much. And without further ado, I introduce you to Ryan Bolton. Where are you at right now?
Tucson, Arizona, which is,
Nice.
yeah, it's not where I normally am, right now, but yeah, I was taking care of a few things down here because this is actually where we do with like John, and stuff where we do our like winter/spring training camp. So yeah.
Right on. You're usually up in New Mexico, right?
Yeah. In our basin, I mean, we can get about that. We can get all into that, maybe as we're talking a little bit, but yeah, we're kind of all over the place. So yeah.
Awesome, man. Well, Ryan, thank you so much. Coach, do most people call you Coach or Ryan?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the person, but yeah. I would say Ryan more than Coach.
Yeah. What do you, is that more normal for you? Like, do you like answering to Coach? Does it feel awkward? I guess you're used to it now.
I think it's probably like the setting, like the environment. Like if we're, if we're like in a session almost, like if somebody says Coach, it seems to make more sense. Whereas like if we're in more of a, like personal environment, I would say if they call me, my name.
Yeah. Sounds good. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, for taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. It seems like this season is, I guess, coming down to a little bit more or less of a roar.
Totally. Yeah, it is. It's definitely, in fact, like this upcoming weekend is the last, like kind of bigger races of the year. And then it does really start to settle down a lot. And then we go into off season, like initiatives, which it's more of it's just a completely different phase. It's a lot more like planning and, planning 2026 and beyond stuff. So, yeah.
Do you travel more than 6 months out of the year? Like how often do you travel?
Very much. Yeah. Like, it's interesting. I don't know where I sleep the most. I've thought it might be interesting for me to like keep a log of where I sleep every night of the year and then be like, okay, what place did I actually spend the most nights? And I don't know what that answer would be, but we do. I mean, we're kind of constantly traveling, really. I mean, depends on what you call traveling because we're in our training camps. So like,
sure.
From January usually into May, we're like in Tucson, Arizona. Then like May to mid to late summer, we're often in Europe. And then from late summer, through the fall, we're at altitude in New Mexico. And then in the off season, which is now basically, where everyone's in their own respective places or whatever. So, but every season looks slightly different too. But we do, I mean, it's kind of like a constant road show.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. Do you have a family?
I do. I have a significant other who has 3 kids. And so, that is challenging as well. And,
Sure.
It's like her job and her schedule with the kids that allows us to be together quite a bit. And we always try to go, so it's not much longer than 2 weeks without like being together in some capacity.
Physical contact. Yeah.
It doesn't always work that way, but it's kind of a good like guidance and rule of thumb to try to keep it that way.
Yeah. I would imagine with your line of work, it has to be kind of like that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. But it works out really well in some ways too, because like, like I said, when we're in Europe, I mean, it's an opportunity for her to come to Europe, or even her kids to come to Europe and like hang out with us and stuff. And so that's kind of like fun. I mean, I think it's unique experience for her, for them, et cetera. So, but yeah, we kind of get to go back and forth a bit.
Yeah. So I know you grew up, or at least you were born in South Dakota. At what point in your life did you start to like expand beyond that horizon of where you kind of grew up? What was it like growing up there too?
That's a good question. Yeah, I was born in South Dakota, just east of the Wyoming border. And when I was 2, I actually moved to Wyoming. And so I grew up in Wyoming, northeast Wyoming, which I always tell people is not the romantic part of Wyoming. It's not like, people watch Yellowstone now, and I think a lot of people know about Jackson, Wyoming, and it's kind of an opposite side of the state. It's I would say more rugged, like more beautiful. It's just sparse. It's very rural. But for me, it's kind of like being a kid is like, you don't like where I grew up was, I mean, that was my reality. I didn't realize, kind of like how maybe isolated and/or small towny it was. But I did, because of athletics. And I mean, I think that's kind of like what often happens is I would say I had an opportunity to travel way more than a lot of people do, even at a relatively young age, because like even nationally, like around the country, just with competitions and everything, which was awesome. Yeah. So, we, whatever, East Coast and California and, basically all around the country. International travel didn't start for me until I actually started like competing in triathlon more. And that was like, because championship races and stuff started to be, in Europe, England, Southern Hemisphere, stuff like that. So that's like, I would say when my world started getting a lot bigger. Yeah.
How would your parents have described you as a child, do you think?
High energy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Inquisitive. I think, maybe, I think, but I talk about like the progression of me as like a kid. I think that maybe when I got to be about 20 or 21, I think that was the point where they're like, thank God he's not in jail. And I think he's not going to be.
Yeah.
And I used my, I used my energy like for good as opposed to bad, I think you could say.
Yeah.
But I think that's the beauty of like endurance sports. And I mean, it really, you look at most endurance athletes, and I think their parents would probably say the same thing, is that, they're incredibly high energy individuals. I mean, I think that's why I got into the first sport that I did, like organized sport that I did was swimming. And my mom said it was because my sister was a swimmer who's 3 years older than me. She's like 8, I was 5. And she was like, and you were on the deck of the swimming pool, like running around, getting in trouble. And I was like, well, why do I have him on the deck of the swimming pool? Why don't I just throw him in the practice with his sister? And so, so she did that. And she's like, and then you still had energy. So then we got you into running stuff. And and it kind of spiraled from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So growing up, it was just you and your sister?
Yeah, yep, exactly. Yeah.
3 years older. She's 3 years older than you?
Yep, she is. And she was, it's funny because like at that age, I think an older sibling, they're always like, I would certainly have not admitted it then and like in high school, but I think like she was like, I was looking up to her, and
sure.
And I mean, that's why I got into sports. And kind of the funny thing is she ended up not being like a big athlete or anything, but it's really what got me into it. It also got me into Girl Scouts. I was part of her Girl Scout troop, and which there's bonuses of that as well, I guess. But,
yeah, that's so funny. It's interesting the way you talked about looking up to your sister. So I have 2 younger sisters. One's 3.5, almost 4 years younger, and the other's 12 years younger. But it's interesting, like, because I recognize they looked up to me, but then as we've gotten older, like there's been times that I've actually been able to like look up to my younger sisters. So it's like as we get older and mature, we can kind of turn the tides a little bit.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, I think there's probably something to be learned from all of them, right? And the different personalities. And I'm sure that, and it's fun, with my partner now, like, I mean, she has 3 kids, and it's fascinating. We always joke, I'm like, there's no way all 3 of them came from the same mother. And she was like, no, I was there. I'm pretty sure they all came from the same mom. But I mean, the differences in them, but I mean, even like me as an adult, what you can learn from their 3 different personalities, regardless of where they are in their birth order, is pretty interesting.
Yeah. That is fascinating.
Yeah.
So what does your sister do now, if you don't mind me asking?
She lives in Denver, Colorado, and she's in real estate. Yeah. She was a
Okay,
teacher,
nice.
but like a lot of teachers, elementary school, I think she really, really got burned out. I mean, she's also 55 years old. So, I mean, she taught for many, many years, but yeah, that now she's in real estate, which I think is equally as stressful, just with a different type of stress. Yeah.
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 So that makes you 52.
Yes,
That
exactly. Yeah.
that's a great age.
Yeah.
I like when I do these interviews. It's always interesting to me the questions I ask. Some of them I try to recycle because I think it's fascinating to hear the different perspectives and that people have in age and experience. So this question, I'm really excited to ask you. But according to you, who is Ryan?
Oh man. It's interesting because I think there's the identity that other people see you as or other people define you as. And I think in that regard, like I'm an athlete, like as an example, an athlete and now a coach I remember when I quit racing professionally, because, I raced professional triathlon for many years. Like there were some people in my life who had a hard time with that transition because of what they defined me as, which I thought was interesting. I was great. I was great with the transition. I was great with, moving forward, but they actually struggled with it because they were like, well, you're an athlete. How do I identify with you if you're not an athlete? And, which was really kind of a strange transition, and especially people that are close to you. But I really personally, like professionally, I would say, I mean, I really do identify as a coach. It's funny because like in that regard, I would say early on in coaching, I was the Olympian that coached. And I would say as I've coached longer, I'm now the coach that was an Olympian, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of an odd thing to say, but I'm more proud of my accomplishments as a coach than I was as an athlete. And I think that not necessarily due to like the success of that stuff, but more just because of like the collaborative collective effort that it takes to coach and get good results as a coach. And so I think I identify more like professionally that way. I think it's funny because I have a hard time not understanding. I think we all do, like how people ultimately interpret you like as a person and, your intensity or your, how laid back you are and stuff like that. And people sometimes they'll tell me, oh, you're, as a coach, like I'm pretty intense. I'm pretty, I don't know if I'd call it demanding. But, I guess I have high expectations. I always tell athletes, like I have, I was like, if I'm working with you, I'm very, very invested in you, but I also expect, kind of that reciprocity back where you're invested, in me and the program as well. Cause I think that's how, you get the best results out of each other ultimately. And, but I guess as far as like, who am I like in that regard, I think, like I said, public perception, people often see you, it's easy to categorize you, like I said, I'm the coach, but I would say like, I have so many different, like, so many things outside of sport too, that I'm interested in just, and a lot of it is like sport, relevant and oriented and everything, but it is like multifaceted, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty intriguing because I would say that that's probably 90% or more not the case in terms of like the identity crisis that it sounds like that I've just from conversations I've had with people, even if they got a podium or gold medal, after post Olympics and they're like trying to figure out what's next. There's like this identity of like, wait, that was my value. I've kind of valued myself on this one event in time.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I see that happens with that, and I mean, because I've coached athletes like through their careers and into retirement, and it's a very tough transition because that is such a big piece of your identity. But what I say with sport too is like, just using triathlon as an example is like when you wake up every day and there's an incredibly clear, high purpose, high passion objective. It's like I'm training for the Olympics. I'm going to win the Olympic gold medal, or I'm training to win the Kona Ironman, or something like that. And so not only does your identity change, but when you wake up in the morning, like, what's your goal? My goal is to take care of my kids and, maybe you get and go to work. It's not that, that really giant, like incredibly crystal clear, like super passionate objective. And I think people have a hard time like with that transition because of that. I mean, it's hard to find something in life that's like as hyper focused, say, as like set, like winning a gold medal, and I think that's what makes that transition really hard for people. And but I think and that's where, in some ways, I feel like I got lucky because, when I quit racing, I went immediately into graduate school, which I think kind of bought me 2 years of figuring that stuff out a little bit.
Some processing time.
Yeah, no, and that's what it kind of functioned as. But, almost immediately, post athletic retirement, I did get into coaching, and I feel like I was lucky to get into it because I found something that was equally, if not more, like stimulating for me, and equally as passion driven as actually being an athlete and shooting for those goals. So, I mean, and I guess it is similar goals, but it's with other people. So, as opposed to yourself, which I think that's what makes it way more rewarding, is as an athlete, your life is incredibly selfish and self-centered. I mean, the world is about you. You're constantly taking care of yourself. You're constantly thinking about what's best for you, all that type of stuff. I mean, I remember, everyone around you is making compromises for you because of your training, because of whatever, oh, we can't do Christmas, at this whatever, because, Ryan has to train, or, the athlete. Whereas, I think that's why it's fun being a coach, because you get to kind of really like give back and be more of a part of a collective process than, just this individual self-centered thing. Yeah.
So based on my reading and listening a little bit, just trying to understand some of your backstory, it sounds like Joe Friel was a bit of a guiding force getting into the coaching side of the world during your, I guess, graduate studies.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. I mean, because he was, I feel like I was really lucky in that way too, is that like even when I was in college, and even, in high school and stuff, I had amazing mentors, amazing coaches. And I mean, part of that is just luck. I mean, just being in the right place at the right time. But I think connecting with Joe, which was really early, I mean, it was in the first year of my triathlon racing, I connected with him, and I remain close with him to this day. And he really was valuable. But when I did quit racing, and we never had a conversation when I was racing of, hey, someday, would you consider coaching? I don't think we ever had that conversation. But when I quit racing, and Joe's not like an overstated guy. Like he's pretty, he's a pretty, like I said, he's almost like understated. He's very cerebral, and so I don't know if we ever sat down and he was like, okay, here's the deal. I think you should be a coach. I think he probably almost more like passively was like, hey, have you ever thought about this? Maybe you would be good at this, or, that type of thing.
Planting the seeds.
Yeah. And then, whatever, I woke up 20 years later and I'm like, woof, yeah, I'm doing it. Yeah. So, yeah. But he was influential in that way. And, I worked with him and his coaching group for many, many years. And then he's like, he definitely retired from direct coaching and everything. He still writes a lot. He still blogs a lot. He's still like heavily involved. I mean, that's one great thing about Joe, is he's like a life learner, and he just keeps on learning. In fact, like we have an annual coaching meeting every year, and I have Joe come on every year, and he's like, what do you want me to talk about? And I'm like, what, like your latest, greatest. And he always comes with really interesting stuff. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you obviously see the value like in mentorship, like you're saying, maybe even the more of the cerebral, passive guiding methodologies. I'm curious with like the position you find yourself in, not just with USA Triathlon, but the variety of coaching, and then obviously the authority that you hold in a room with, people who may not know you super well, like, oh, he's an Olympian. Like there's a level of authority, I think, that comes with that. Mm-hmm. So how has that changed the way that you think about your interactions with people that you're able to influence?
Yeah, I think like with coaching and just like, the athletes that I directly work with, it's just a part of the process. It's just a big part of the process. I mean, I always say this, like coaches love to sit down on podcasts and talk about science and testing and, VO2 maxes and lactate thresholds and all that stuff. And I always say about coaching, like that's almost a front for not being a good coach, because that's the easy stuff. I mean, you can read books, you can learn that stuff. Like, I mean, it's readily available. I would say the hard part of being a coach is that ultimately that connection, like with athletes, and that being a guide for an athlete. And I think the challenge of it as a coach is that everyone's different. You know what I mean? I mean, I work with, probably like 12 professional, triathletes right now. And the 12, they're all incredibly different people. And I would say the one thing they have in common is that they're incredibly passionate about sport, and they're also incredibly like gifted athletes. You know what I mean? They're talented, gifted athletes, I would say. But aside from that, they're incredibly different people. And for me to learn that and then help guide them, because and it's funny because as I get older and as I've been coaching more, you definitely start seeing, or I don't know if I start seeing it more, but I think I start realizing more and working more that my job as a coach is like also just beyond, getting them ready for an event. It's like also just kind of like helping them. Because I mean, I'm working with athletes who are, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and it's hard for me to remember sometimes that they're so young and so like kind of, like not mature in life and everything. And
impressionable too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. And so like really like having those conversations with them and just kind of helping them become better people. And that better people doesn't mean, that like sounds pretty lofty and almost arrogant, but just like, helping them understand the way that the world works and how they can function better in the world, because ultimately like that helps them be better athletes as well. And kind of the same thing is, I think at this point in my career, I can reflect on those people who were that person in my life that I didn't realize. Same thing, like I said, kind of back, full circle to the Joe Friel thing, is like how he was ultimately probably like passively coaching me in a lot of ways. And I didn't even really know it. Yeah.
So with the different people that you do work with, like you said, it's a selfish sport. There is a big focus on this one goal. Identity does become wrapped in that. But it seems like you had like this very healthy mindset of being able to disassociate your value from like what it is you're doing, to like, and realizing you could apply it to something different. Obviously, coaching was kind of in the first seat. For your athletes and the people that you work with, especially in the younger ones, do you ever notice like an over obsession with like, this is my identity? And then do you ever try to do anything in your coaching style to, I don't know, suggest to them like, hey, you are valuable beyond this, like so that they don't have that crisis when that end of the games comes or whenever that championship is or whatever?
Well, for sure. And I guess to start, I would say I definitely personally did not have that balance like my whole career at all. You know what I mean? Like I think I started like as a very much like a kind of a typical athlete, like that was like obsessed with perfection. I was not balanced. I was, all about like my training and, kind of
the
nothing.
Numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And just, and pushing and achieving, and regardless of what got in the way, kind of like just, pushing that aside or whatever. But I think as an athlete, like I grew that way. And then, like clearly as a coach, like a ton of growth in that regard. But I do with the athletes, it is something, because I think that, and this, I mean, it's a really simple talking point with an athlete, but I think that the best athletes in the world are actually very well balanced people as well in general. You know what I mean? It's not sustainable as an athlete, and you can also only perform at a certain level if you're not like well balanced. And some like I could see an athlete saying, well, that person's a really good athlete and they're not well balanced. And I'd be like, they are a really good athlete, but they're not a great athlete, and they're far from being a great person.
Sheesh.
And so this is an interesting thing that like Joe Friel actually told me a story, and I remember it's kind of a long story. I'll try to summarize it really quickly.
No, take your time.
Yeah, he said he was like, and this was a powerful moment, and I don't even know if he remembers telling me the story, but he was like, I think he just got back from some conference, or he'd been at it, and a guy was speaking who did Leadville, the 100-mile running race, and he said, and the guy's standing on the podium, and he's talking about, he's like, he basically, the summary of the speech was all the things that he sacrificed. And he was like, I lost my job, I lost my wife, I lost my family. And then the dude at the end of the speech held up, and he says, but, and he held up the belt buckle, you know, 'cause how you get a belt buckle for Leadville. And he says, but it was all worth it. And he's like, I think the guy thought he was like being all, macho and cool, and thought everyone was going to be like, yeah. And he was like, and I was just sitting there and be like, this guy is like clueless and completely out of touch. And I would agree. I mean, especially for an age group athlete, like, throw away your entire life just so you can, get a belt buckle from a race is absolutely ridiculous. But I do think that that's a good, model or comparison of, these other athletes. Like, I don't, because I mean, of having balance in your life, understanding that there are other important things in your life, because ultimately, like I said, I feel like to perform at the top level, like it is this balance of, optimizing everything from a performance and training standpoint, but also like making sure you're taking care of relationships and yourself and your own, personal growth outside of being an athlete. And and I see that. I mean, I really do see that with athletes. And it's interesting because as you see that balance, manifesting more in an athlete, you actually see them perform at a better and better level. And some athletes naturally have that, and some of them don't. You really have to, help redirect them with that. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I was reading that kind of your coaching philosophy, you've been known to emphasize that high performance should be framed kind of with this 3-part model of physiology, head and heart. I think we're touching on that a little bit. Yeah. Do you remember writing that?
Yeah, I do. Well, yeah, no, and it's kind of like what we're talking about is well, I guess the how I would summarize that is it was once again, we're talking about good, versus great athletes. And I say to be the best athlete in the world, you have to have all 3 of those things in spades, basically. And what I mean by that is you have to have the physiology. I think that's the easiest one, honestly, for people to have. I've met, over the course of my athletic career and my coaching career, an incredible amount of insanely talented athletes. You know what I mean? Just crazy physiology, just raw natural talent. But combining that with, and then you get the, the athlete or there's and what I said is the head is the mental component, the ability to be coached, the ability to listen, the ability to learn, the ability to also handle what it takes to be an elite level athlete, mentally. And then the heart is the want, the drive, the passion, the fire, and it's funny because like I said, I've met people who have all of that fire, all of the heart, they have all of that, but they don't have the physiology or they don't have the mind. You've met the people who have the mind, they've got that mindset, they'll do anything it takes, but once again, but maybe it's a little dry, it lacks passion, so it lacks the heart, or it lacks the physiology. But and I've met tons, like I said, of people who are physiologically absolutely talented, and maybe even they have the heart for it and they want it so badly, but they're, they have this inability to take direction or to focus or to, they're kind of missing the mental component. And it's such a pleasure to work with athletes that have all 3, because those are the athletes that can, once again, not just be good, but consistently be good, And I think that's the thing is you might be able to, kind of be lacking one of the things and pop a good event every once in a while, but to be consistently good, you kind of have to have all 3 of those things, in as a full set, and and sometimes it takes time to develop all 3, obviously, as well. I think that's another kind of, I forgot, it was an NBA coach, and it was a thing, it left an impact. I saw it maybe 4 months ago, and he said, I recruited when I was recruiting people, he was those superstars, I didn't, the superstar athletes, sometimes he was they weren't that fun to work with. He was and they also ended up not being the best guys on the team. And I think everyone knows kind of the Michael Jordan story and however much of that was real or fabricated, that he wasn't that great of a basketball player, and, he grew. But I would say the most successful athletes I've worked with actually aren't the most talented ones, physiologically talented ones. They're the ones who, because they know that they have to work and they want to work and they learn what that looks like and they don't take anything for granted. So they're willing to uncover, every rock and and really, put everything they have into it. Whereas sometimes I feel like those talented athletes, they're leaving 10-20% off the table just because they're used to just showing up and everything just happening really well. But at the top level, at the Olympic level, at the world level, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, that's super interesting you bring that up, because I think it's similarly in business or overall, let's just, for shallow sake of making an example, but like monetary success, it's often the people who end up pushing hard and are self-made are the ones who grew up and knew what poverty tasted like, looked like, smelled like,
sure.
felt like.
No, for sure. And not to go too deep into that, but I can tell a lot about an athlete from how they grew up and what their background is, and if usually someone, not necessarily came from a scrappy background, but came from a background where they had to know, and this is the term that I would put on that, because I see it with age group athletes too. The people who have learned the value of a dollar, you know what I mean? If they know what the value of a dollar is, like normally it's because they've had to like work for it. They've had to earn it. And a dollar can be a metaphor as well, but even just a dollar, not as a metaphor, but, and people who don't understand that value, it's hard to get them to that top level because, like said, stuff has come too easily, or they haven't had to suffer, or they haven't had to the other term that I like to use, they've never had to wake up and look in the mirror in the morning, you know what I mean? And be like, who are you? What does it take? What are you willing to do? And stuff like that. I think some people think that they do that, but it's not until you really have to do that you actually get to that inner core and that inner drive.
Yeah. So of the physiology, the head and the heart, which do you struggle with the most, or have you struggled with the most?
Me as an athlete, or me as a coach with athletes?
Both.
Oof. Man, that's really hard. As an athlete, I would say the heart was always there. I wish the head was, it's kind of like a wisdom thing. I wish I knew then what I know now with the mental components of it, I think I got caught up in, which athletes get caught up in today. And we could do an entire podcast about this, but what everyone else is doing, and is it better than me, and that type of stuff, as opposed to just me, when I look back at me as an athlete, I wish I would have just shown up at every race and been like, no, man, you're the man. You know what I mean? I don't care what so-and-so's been doing or what so-and-so said or anything like that. And physiologically, I think I was talented, but I wasn't super gifted. You know what I mean? My numbers were really good, but they weren't oh my gosh, off the charts crazy, So I would say maybe a little bit of all of them. Yeah. And, from a coach standpoint, man, I love working on all three. I think that's why I like coaching is and I think that's the key is each athlete, you can break them into those categories and, they may be, and you can almost put percentages on them and bringing them all up, and one athlete, like I said, maybe it is the physiology component that you need to work on the most. That's almost the most simple thing. Once again, you train them well, but I think physically train them well, but the other, when working on the other things and balancing, those things out and getting them either mentally stronger or, passionately stronger. But I would say as a coach, I don't know if I have a strength or weakness in all of those, technically from a background perspective, trained wise, graduate school, undergraduate school is all physiology. So, but like I said, I feel like that's the easy part because even if I hadn't went to undergrad or graduate school, I could open up books and read articles every day about, proper training techniques and all that type of stuff. Whereas the other stuff is less published. And I guess it kind of goes into another topic here. I do feel like the probably, in my opinion, the most uncovered, where the biggest performance gains are to be had, right now, the lowest hanging fruit, I would say, is the mental component of training, racing, all that type of stuff. It just doesn't have, there's been a ton of research, but not nearly as much as, we've sunk into basically basic physiology and stuff. I think there's a lot to be gained there. And I think that's where you do see gains is people just, the mental game and everything. But yeah, I mean, you can look at some of the best athletes in the world right now and the way they approach sport, and you can see that's the case.
Well, what are some telltale signs, like if of an athlete maybe you're picking up, or if you're just simply analyzing someone to figure out where their mental game is? Is it performance on race day? Is it conversations? Do you ask a set of questions, like an open interview?
That's a great question too. I don't, like, I would say, like, my style is it's definitely more organic. It's not, it's not like, okay, we're sitting down to do a session where I'm going to ask you 10 questions and then assess your mental, strength or something like that. But honestly, a big piece of that is like just looking at how people approach their life in general, and the mental component is often that way. Like, and this is what I'll always tell my athletes is I was like, I want you, like, you need to be professional about everything you do in your life, not just the training component, like, because it's a mindset. It's like, it is a mindset of greatness, and a mindset, but also a mindset of balance and, taking care of all the things you need to take care of. And like I said, and like on the training side of things, that is like nutrition, psychology, the training side of things, but it's also, balancing out like all of the like personal stuff. And I mean, kind of like a funny example that I would use is like, do you make your bed when you wake up in the morning? You know what I mean? And I know that's almost a cliche and it's been discussed before, but I'm like, that tells me a lot. You know what I mean? Is that important? Because I think it's important because it sets your day up like with, on a professional, foot, basically. But it's the same thing, responding to text messages. Responding to emails, the way that you talk to other people, the way that you talk to me as a coach, like all that stuff is part of like professionalism. And it's like I said, it's part of being in a good mental space that shows that you are focused, on like your goals and on you and on being the best person you can be, like in general. And I know that's a lot to ask from some people too. And like I said, some people are, very strong that way. But another thing I can tell you, and this is a USAT, USA Triathlon, working with USA Triathlon now. I've worked with them since 2018. So I get to, work with like all of the USAT elite level athletes, and it's from some talent IDs, but I coach some of them, but like I get to interact with them. And one clear sign to me is the most successful athletes, the most consistently good athletes are also the most professional in that regard too. They're the ones who, like I said, you send out a survey, they respond back. It's simple things like that, but they're the athletes. They ask good questions. You know what I mean? They're really good. They're really good at expressing their needs. They're really good at keeping positive, like a positive outlook. They're not looking for the problems. They're looking for solutions. Like it's funny because like you can almost look at, the performance of individuals in particular, and you can see that they're the most like professional, the most mentally like acute athletes are the ones who are just the most successful. They're not necessarily the most talented physiologically. Yeah.
What part do you think, like your belief as a coach in the athlete matters?
A huge part. It's kind of like what I said earlier is like when I, sit down with athletes and like if I'm onboarding an athlete, like I'm like, it usually takes a while to get to that process of saying yes, because you want to make sure that you're a good fit in the first place. But when you do, a lot of times what I say to them is I'm like, listen, like if I'm working with you, it means that I'm putting like 100% like belief in you. And but I also say, but that's a lot of responsibility because I expect the same from you. I expect you to, to give me everything you have that you can as well. But I think that belief is huge. But I also think that it can be a flaw. And I think one thing that I've seen less successful coaches do is they artificially inflate an athlete's confidence, and
you can do it, anything.
Yeah, no, exactly. And after a while, coach, what am I ready for? And I feel like that's one thing. And I always tell athletes this, I'm like, I'm a realist. And sometimes that's hard because I'll sit down, and when we're talking about a upcoming race or what races they should do or something, I'm like, we're going to like do this because of this. And I'm like, yeah, we don't just go into every race and I'm like, you can win today. You know what I mean? I'm like a realist. I'm like, this is what I think is possible. This is what is possible, like all that stuff. And I mean, honestly, it's pretty rare for us to look at objective goals going into races. But I mean, there's a lot of, process goals normally involved. But even then, like, there are even unspoken like objective goals, and athletes know that I'm realistic with that. And I do see some coaches, like I said, in what happens with coaches who are just constantly like, oh, how am I going to do this weekend? Oh, you're going to do incredibly good and you're amazing and you're going to dominate. And then the athlete doesn't. I think, over time that actually really erodes that relationship, because the athlete then gets to a point and like, I don't trust you. Every time I race, you tell me that, I'm the awesome and I'm the best in the world and I'm going to do really well. And I actually don't. And so it's like, what do you know? They start losing faith or trust in that coach, because honestly, the coach has got one game plan and it's like, just, boost the athlete's confidence. But I would say we do that too in our racing. Is like, I like to, and I tell my athletes that, is I'm like, we have a growth mindset in our group, in our coaching group. And I was like, so we're going to expose you to difficult situations, to difficult races. We're not going to cherry pick races. We're not going to go to, some obscure race in the middle of nowhere with 12 athletes in it and then, have you win it and feel like a hero because you didn't get any experience there. There's no growth there. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I'm actually going to send you to challenging races with a lot of good athletes so you can see where that level is. But the thing is that's also coaching. It's like, well, in order for us to do that, like, I need to make sure that you're going into that race with that growth mindset, that you're not going to go to the race and be like, well, geez, I got 28th, and I'll be like, 28th is fine. It's better than first, at a race where you got nothing out of. And because I want my athletes to kind of pine for that, that top level of competition, and also understand, where those limits are and, where that bar is, because I feel like it's really important for them to see where that bar is. And as long as an athlete has a growth mindset and is coached well going into that, then I think there's a ton of value there. So, yeah.
I'm really glad that you mentioned the bit about, a false sense of confidence or overinflation, because it was interesting. I've been coaching now for 4 years, and I had a new athlete as of like 6 months, and we were kind of reevaluating how the back end of his season went. And he said something to me. He's like, and by the way, like, I need you to like really believe in me. And I was like, well, what does he actually mean? And I had to think a lot about that, because he'd never run over like 12 miles before. I signed up for 70.3 and then signed up for an Ironman 3 weeks later. And then I found it. And I was like, hey, let me help you not kill yourself.
Yeah, right.
So, but I really had to think a lot about that, because I was like, well, for me personally, there is a level of like, if you believe in yourself, like, you can transcend a little bit of like how hard or fast or whatever you think you can go. But then I don't want to be responsible for like, yeah, you're going to go out and run a 5-minute flat mile for 13 miles, like, when you've never run over 10. So it's like,
it's a very, very delicate balance. It is, you know what I mean? We're inspiring confidence in an athlete, and probably more importantly, like what you said, is inspiring them to know that you believe in them, without giving them a false sense of confidence and a false sense of what they can accomplish. And and I think what you're using is great, because that, like you said, people will come to you and be like, hey, I want to, let's talk a beginner triathlete, hey, I want to do a triathlon. Will you be my coach? I want to do an Ironman in 3 months. You know what I mean? And you're like, well,
do you want to die?
Yeah, exactly. And like telling that person, hey, listen, I think you can do an Ironman, and I would highly encourage you to do one, but it might take a little more than 3 months, and it has nothing to do with, my belief in your ability to do that. It has just to do simply with like what it takes to finish one of these things.
Yeah, even if you do have a ton of talent, it's like,
right. No, totally. Exactly. Yeah. Or sometimes, or in that case, I'd be like, you can do it, but it's not going to be pretty. You know what I mean? If you want to cross the finish line feeling good about yourself, we maybe need to give it more time.
Yeah. So from a coaching perspective, would it have been a good fit for you to be coaching yourself when you were in your prime as an athlete?
Naturally, I think, yeah. But I mean, if it weren't me, obviously. But
Yeah.
I think, I mean, which makes sense, right? Because, I kind of understand, myself and like what I'm thinking. And I mean, I think to be that close and that in tune with your coach would be incredibly valuable. But I'm also, probably as a lot of people are, like my own biggest critic and stuff. And I think that would be dangerous, like being, coaching, like, having me coach myself if I were two different people. I think that self-coaching is incredibly dangerous just because for that reason alone, you know what I mean? Like you're going to give yourself what you think you need. I also think, and it kind of brings up another topic, and I'm a big believer and I mean, and even, I mean, I'll use, the sport of triathlon is a good example. Some of the best coaches in the sport of triathlon were not triathletes and, maybe have never done an Ironman, maybe never done a triathlon, honestly. And I do think that it's like a coach's experience as an athlete can be really beneficial, but it's not absolutely necessary to be a great coach. And I think it's interesting that I say that because people would be like, well, don't you want to tout that, you've been in the Olympics, you've won Ironmans before. Like,
Yeah.
But I feel like that's a pretty trivial part of like my success as a coach is my actual, what I've accomplished as an athlete, and I think a lot of people look at that or think that there's, more value there. Where I'm like like I said, some of the best coaches in the world in all sports, like they're great coaches. They weren't necessarily, maybe they were involved with that sport in some way as an athlete, but not necessarily the case. So, but yeah, I see that.
Yeah, that's interesting. Who would you say is like the best coach that you've ever met?
Oh man,
I got to know.
That's a really, and once again, it's kind of subjective and objective, like objectively looking at stuff.
Or maybe I should ask it such as, who is a coach that you have most greatly wanted to emulate pieces of like how they operate? Because they're so impactful.
That's more complicated because I think it's like, I always say even coaching philosophy is from both the technical, like physiology, scientific side of it, also to the personality, personal relationship side of it, kind of the art side of it. I feel like it's a like my style is a smorgasbord of like a ton of people that have influenced me, and I mean, I'll go back to my high school running coach, to my, my collegiate running coach, and which, by the way, I'll just using those two as an example. My high school running coach was like an incredibly, like for the time, for the period, like he trained us really hard, and like it was really hard training. My collegiate coach, I would say, was less that way, but he was way more of a coach, way more of a relationship person, like he had all the sayings, all of the things. And I mean, it's funny because he just got inducted. My college coach, his name was Jim Sanchez. He ran for Joe Friel at Adams State University and then coached at the University of Wyoming. And he just got inducted to the University of Wyoming Hall of Fame this last year. And I went to the induction ceremony and I hadn't seen him. I'd messaged him and maybe we had chatted a few times, but I hadn't seen him in person in probably, 20 years. Wow. And he just instantly, I sat down with him and he instantly just started, and I didn't even, when I was being coached by him, I didn't realize it, but he just instantly went into like coach mode, and not like, what have you been doing running? And, have you heard the latest research that doing 10 by 800 meter repeats with 1 minute rest at threshold is, we didn't go to, he just started going into like the life philosophies type stuff. And so like, I would say like, he's a good example. I got a lot out of that. Joe Friel, like such a technical, coach and such a like kind of like pioneer in coaching. I like, in running, Arthur Lydiard. I love Lydiard's stuff. I love the way that he framed things. I've seen him speak multiple times. He passed away, but he, like his running philosophies, I really, really subscribe to. And I also, there are some other collegiate running coaches that, I'd connected with in college and post-collegiately that I really subscribe to their, philosophies too. Some swim coaches, I would say the same way, but it's kind of a smorgasbord, of all of that type of stuff. But I still have those people in my life today. I mean, I've met people now who, like, I meet them who are coaches, and I actually had a conversation. I won't name his name because I don't know if you'd want me to, but I've had a conversation with a guy recently, and he's a coach. He's been a coach for a really, really long time. And I was talking to him. I was like, man, I was at one of our races. I was at a WTCS race in France because I remember the conversation, and we were talking, and he was like, well, he's like, I appreciate you, and I appreciate you being open to, listening to what I'm saying. And I was like, yeah. And I was like, I haven't thought about this. I was like, but I was like, it's great for even me at this stage in my career to have someone to talk with, like, coaching stuff about. Like, once again, not should we be doing, this workout at this time, but more just like, hey, this is, these are challenges that I have as a coach. And I was like, I'm not asking you to be this for me. I was like, but I kind of am, is like, will you, like, continue just to have these conversations with me? And we won't call it a mentorship, but I just appreciate your advice. And he was like, no, absolutely, man. Cause he's an older coach. He's probably, he's 15, 20 years older than me. So, but I was like, I mean, I think that growth and having that growth is always a nice thing too. So not only, I guess, long answer to your question, but I would say, there are a lot of people, like, all, picking up pieces here and there from all of them, but continuing, to get that. Like I said, even Joe Friel, like, when almost every time I talk to Joe Friel, he has something fascinating to say, usually once again, more on, like, the physiology training side of things, but it's like, it's eye opening to me. You know what I mean? So I think just keeping those ears open and continuing those relationships and learning from those people is always an incredibly valuable thing. And which, a whole other topic, but again, is I do think there's so much noise in coaching right now, and especially when it comes to, like, equipment and data analysis and science and stuff. And I think that's a big part of being a coach now, is, like, weeding that noise out, because there's so much BS. I mean, and it's funny because, as you know, with coaching, athletes will come to me and they'll be like, hey, I just saw this new device that, such and such pro is using, and this is the newest, latest, greatest thing. And I mean, because that guy's the best in the world right now, so how could it not be? And like,
athlete endorsement.
As I got older, as I got older, I've been way better with my intuition with that. I think, like, I used to be like, well, shoot, I'm going to have to read all about this and, dive into it as much as I possibly can and all that stuff. And a lot of times now I've, like, learned, I'm like, no, my first intuition is normally like, well, that kind of sounds like BS to me. And then when I do a little bit of research, I'm like, it is. And that athlete's just getting paid, and it's definitely not. Whereas there are still those gems, though, that do come up, and you can't miss those gems of important things, like to implement into training or racing or whatever. And I think that it's one of the hardest things about life right now, is just sorting through all the chaos and noise. But I think as a coach, that's like another key part of it, especially just like an athlete, especially if you're wanting to coach people at the highest level in the world. You know what I mean? I think you've got to be in tune with that stuff as much as possible, and also be able to eliminate this stuff. Because for the athletes, they don't want to have to, like, think, should I be taking this new supplement that, that is actually completely ineffective and useless? I mean, they kind of rely on you to eliminate that noise.
Are you a good coach?
Yes, I would say, yeah. I mean, I would hope so. But this is what I would say about that is I would just let the results of my athletes speak to that, The amount of athletes that I've worked with over the years, both talented and untalented, who have risen, to the top level, I think just kind of like it kind of validates that. Yeah. And I mean, that's a whole other topic once again, is I think there's a lot of noise in the coaching world, and there's some people who are really, really, really great on Instagram, and all that type of stuff. But if you look at, like, historical results and success, and at success at the highest level, you would realize that it's all just a ruse, and I think I'm sensitive to that, because I'm kind of the opposite. I'm not on Instagram every day telling people how great I am or how great my athletes are, but because I think that's just more my personality. I'd be like, just do the research and and look at who I've worked with and, what they've accomplished. And I hope that you would come to the conclusion that I do a good job. Yeah.
Good answer. I think the most skillful and dangerous people that sit in a room are usually the ones that are quieter. They're not
Yeah.
the boisterous ones sitting there. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And it's funny though, because the world today, and I mean, it's really, it's like almost like a moral battle with myself is like, because self-promotion is such a thing, now and all that type of stuff. And I'm really not good at it and I don't feel comfortable with doing it. But sometimes like, it's almost like necessary just to be like
Exist.
relevant. Right. Yeah. To exist. Yeah. Which is a bummer because it's not who I am from like a natural, from a human nature standpoint.
Yeah, I was going to say, is that nurture or nature? Like, were these principles that your parents held, or is this something you kind of adopted or were born with?
Right. That's a good question too. I think my dad was the type of guy he was kind of like Joe Friel, and I really respect my dad. Is he never sat down with me and said, "Son, we're having a talk today about, the meaning of life or about, what it means to be a man," or, anything like that. He all of his lessons were like subtle and in his actions. And one thing I would say that like he made very clear, like growing up, was, what the athletes that he respected in sport. And whatever sport it was, track and field, like basketball, they were always the athletes that just showed up and kicked ass, basically, you know what I mean? And did the work, didn't mouth off, didn't tell everyone how great they were and everything. And I think that like, obviously that's partially nature, as I have his genes, but I think like that nurture component from him was that, just be understated and just do a great job. And ultimately, people will see that success. But I can say like, I think it is obviously a little bit of both, like adapting that, but I would also say the athletes that I work with, that I'm most successful with, like appreciate that about me. You know what I mean? They like see these bells and whistles and like, don't look behind the curtain coaches. And they're like, I would never work with that guy because I see that it's all a ruse and it's all BS and everything. And the real reason why I do work with you is because you are real and you're straight up front. And I know you don't play those games and, which I think ultimately, if you can get through that, then it gives them the confidence, So, yeah, I know, an athlete who we haven't mentioned, and because I know that you've had him on, is John Reed. John Reed is that guy. You know what I mean? He is like, he's down to earth. He does not want any excess BS in his life, and he can smell that from a mile away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I really appreciate about him. Yeah. Because,
I know he talks quite well about you, and he did in the podcast as well. He's actually told me to write your name down to reach out, so I'm so glad for John
cool.
to do that.
Yeah.
But my goodness, he seems like he could be like your son.
Yeah,
Like
it's funny because my Natalie, my significant other, often says that. She's like, "Oh my gosh," which is actually scary because like I look at things about John and it does remind me. But I think that's why I can connect with him as well, because I think we do have like similar levels of like intensity. We came from very different backgrounds in certain ways, but also similar backgrounds. Like I said, he's a very working class kid, and he has this drive, he has this passion, he has this mindset, and which I really appreciate. And I mean, there's a lot of athletes that I work with that have that as well. But you're right, John. It's funny because he is. I think it's a little bit easier to connect with him because I do think that there are similarities between the two of us. And I just know that like, there's also just kind of this mutual like respect and trust in each other, which is incredibly, important to have as well. But yeah, I mean, yeah. And I mean, yeah, you see it with him too. Like he's got an incredible mindset for growth, and he's doing that too. He's just consistently getting better and better and better. It's funny because the conversation I had with him somewhat recently is, he's had a heck of a year this year, and he's the top ranked American by quite a ways from a point standpoint. And he's definitely been the most consistent American placing at a top level. And he like, I always want him to do well. And, he was on a podium at a WTCS at the age of 23, which is pretty amazing. And it's rare. I mean, the last WTCS podium we had was when Morgan won Yokohama, which was a few years ago now. And I'm like, you're 23. And John's like, yeah. And that's John's mindset. I'm going to be on the podium at every race, here on out. And I'm like, well, that would be great. And I was like, and I don't have that expectation because honestly, in world triathlon racing, it's difficult, like just the dynamics of races for that to happen. And I was like, and I'm going to be honest with you. I was like, I don't want you doing that just yet. And he was like, well, he's like, what do you mean? Why? And I was like, because early. Like, I was like, you're on this trajectory, you know what I mean? And I know it's nice to have these athletes like on this trajectory. And, as you get up here and you start doing this, it gets like, harder and harder and harder. I'm like, LA is, 3 years away. I was like, you are in a perfect place right now, for where we need to be in this moment, and it's like,
don't
it's
adjust
almost
the throttle, just
keep it well, and that's the thing. It's almost like when you're coaching an athlete and all of a sudden they're like really fit and you're like, oh my gosh, our race is in 6 weeks and they're ticking every box right now. You're like, I want to like almost like throttle it off a little bit and everything.
Yeah.
And with him, like even on, I mean, that can happen on a short-term perspective, but it can also happen like on a long-term perspective. But I think he sees that. And I mean, that's another value of like, I think value of any good athlete is they do see, like he sees the big picture, the long-term picture. And he's also, once again, a realist, you know what I mean? He understands, I mean, he could be in the opposite, like space and he would know that. Like if he were going to WTCS races and getting lapped out of them, like at this point, like, and if I said, dude, you're going to win the Olympics, he'd be like, he's like, how do you see that trajectory happening, man? Like he'd be real with me and he wouldn't know that I was, kind of like full of it. But I think, that he like said, he sees that long-term, he always wants the best. I mean, all really good athletes do and everything, but he also sees like the big picture and the fact that that doesn't happen overnight, and especially at his age. But, I think that's the value of really good athletes is they can see that they're not looking 2 weeks down the line, 2 months down the line. They have that big long-term outlook. And I try to preach that to them as well, especially, especially when you get a kid as young as John. I mean, I think I started working with him when he's like, 21 years old. And so like, it's like, hey, like, you're this good this year. And then, we're just going to keep on progressing like that. And especially when you get talent ID athletes who aren't even coming from the sport of triathlon, like really preaching that long-term thing, because it sometimes takes a while to like start seeing results from them. Yeah.
Do you ever get emotional with your athletes, whether that's watching a finish line or?
Oh yeah. Oh no, for sure. Yeah. Big time. Yeah. It's actually something that I need to work on because it can make a weekend, and I always say this is something that I'll say, especially, when you have 8 athletes racing on a weekend, not all of them are ever, you never have a weekend where everyone just crushes it, but you also never have a weekend where everyone just totally blows it. You know what I mean? It's usually like this athlete did amazing. This athlete did about what you'd expect. This athlete had a bad day. But it's kind of hard as a coach because you do get, I get so emotionally invested in them as people, it's like almost like empathy ultimately. And that like you feel the high of, I feel the high of their highs but you also feel the low of their lows. So like on the same day, like emotionally, like, like I get back to a hotel room after a big race, it's 8:00 and I'm exhausted. And a lot of it, I think, doesn't have to do with the fact that I've been on my feet in the sun all day. It has to do with like just the emotion of the race, both the highs and the lows. Yeah. And I think that's, it is a pretty like hard. And like I said, that is one thing I'm trying to work on myself is to not let myself like, I think it's an important like attribute to be that connected to the race, to the outcomes, to the athletes that way. But it's also something to kind of regulate because it really beats you down. You know what I mean? It wears you out. Yeah. And just like the athlete, sometimes it's completely out of your control, Yeah.
As the spearhead of like, obviously the program and then the other things that you do that we haven't talked about, do you ever feel lonely as a leader? Like where you feel a little isolated and unable to, I guess I won't even finish that question, but
not really. And I would say because I have people in my life who kind of like fill the different
buckets.
Like to, like I know I can go to this person to, talk about this. I know that I can go to this other person to talk about this. And so I feel like it's not, I don't feel like lonely in like that way. I do feel like it is hard for people who aren't in that world or coaching at that level to understand, like I said, how connected, you are to the athletes
Yeah.
and, and how, like, it can impact you so much. Yeah. But I also think, like I said, I mean, I kind of philosophically, I feel like you need to have that connection with them in order to be, truly, truly effective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. What is something difficult that you're going through that people don't often see?
That's a good question too. I would just say, it's funny because I think people see it and outwardly express it, but they don't totally understand it, if that makes sense. And it's just that we are a traveling roadshow. We're gone a lot. We're on the road a lot. This is what I would say. It's almost the opposite. When people say, well, where have you been the last month? And I'll be like, well, I was at training camp at altitude in Switzerland, and then we went to China, and then I went to Australia, and I was in Australia for 3 weeks, and I just got back. And they're like, oh my God, you live the coolest life. You get to see the coolest things. And it's like, from an outside perspective, that is cool. And I mean, I actually, I appreciate that about my job. You know what I mean? I get to travel to amazing places all around the world all year, but it's also exhausting and it's away from people you love. It's away from your family, all that type of stuff. So I think that people see it, but what they don't understand is that, and it's funny because, it is kind of like this traveling circus, and it's all the same athletes and all the same coaches and all the same administrative staff. And usually, like, we were just in Australia at the grand final. And by the end, you're kind of like sitting around with all these people who have been on the circuit all year. And everyone's like, oh, I can't wait to get home.
Yeah.
And it's like, and everyone is equally as passionate and dedicated, like, to their jobs and what they're doing and everything. But also, it's almost like those people get it. It's almost like this joint bonding. And I actually feel that when now during the off season, then you go to the first season of the year, you reconnect with all these people from around the world who you kind of have this really common bond with, and they're kind of like this road family almost. And that's kind of a nice thing, because I think those people understand it the most, but I mean, it's unspoken, they know exactly that, you've just been on 22 flights, and, and traveled around the world and eaten weird food and, dealt with strange people and, all those things, yeah.
I love that, especially at such a young age now, like that athletes can have those experiences, especially with the multicultural experience.
Big time, yeah.
I feel like it opens people's perspective just to be a better human in so many ways. Like I know too many people, even in my own like immediate families, who have like never been outside of like 50 miles from like their town, and just the mindset that can create. And there are certain people, I mean, there's still good people in those areas for sure. But in terms of just your ability to empathize or understand or just hold your tongue a little bit longer, I think, as you hear about life's things, it's like,
I mean, that's the value of travel in general, right? Regardless of if it's, for sport or anything. You're right. These athletes, it's funny because it's such a lesson in adversity as well, in dealing with adversity. You know what I mean? You go to these foreign countries and stuff isn't like it is, say in the United States. Sometimes it's better, sometimes stuff is functioning way better. And, sometimes it's like significantly more challenging. And I think that is the sign of like the great athletes too, is they just learn to like, roll with that. It was funny because actually my significant other, she was like, you're so good with international travel. She was like, you deal with it. And I was like, that's a learned behavior.
Yeah,
what I mean? She was like, you just don't like, we land in the middle of nowhere and, and they're like, well, you're stuck here for 3 days in this weird airport in the middle of nowhere. And you're always like, whatever. And I was like, well, cause you kind of got to be that way. But
if you're done, you'll die of stress.
But I think like what you said, and I mean, it's almost like, it's not political commentary, but like, our athletes, like they see how the rest of the world works and what they struggle, what the rest of the world struggles with or doesn't struggle with, and how they function, and even their perception, of us as Americans and the United States. And I think that's so valuable for anyone. I mean, once again, just travel in general, but definitely for our athletes, it makes them like, more well-rounded like individuals. And like I said, it's such an opportunity for growth, especially at such a young age. I mean, I remember like my early races, same thing. I mean, those first trips that I took were like just mind blowing, you know? Like my first world championships, or actually, it's not true. My second world championships was in England when I was 19 years old. And I mean, England is probably the most American, like almost place in the world. And I mean, it was like, you know, I was like, oh, geez, I'm this international, like, you know, traveler. And oh my gosh, it's so different. You know? And now after being to, you know, just the craziest places in the world, like, you know, England seems incredibly mild. But even at that point, that was such an eye opener, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel, especially on the topic of empathy, because so when I was in college, I was afforded just the opportunity. I started a small business that somehow landed me going to do business in China for a number of years up until COVID. But for me, like, even though the business eventually like went up in smoke and I had all I could walk away from with that was just a ton of experience. But one of the greatest lessons I learned was just like this, just for one small example, you know, kids who grow up in the U.S. and at least in my generation, everybody would be like, oh, made in China. Oh, it's got to be junk kind of a thing.
Right.
And we hear all of the news and whatever. But when I went to China, man, it was like the most eye-opening experience because the people I met were so long-term focused, so kind, paid for me to go to here, go to there, go to a competing factory. And it just like, it started to like wake me up for the first time in that, oh, well, just because China, or whatever Trump says or whoever says, like these are actual human beings who have a lived experience and they have different values. But like to give that to someone is such a gift that I wish everyone could have.
It's funny that you say that too, because so this was our second year of going to Weihai in China for the WTCS, second year that they've had a WTCS. The first year, it was almost like COVID because they had us like in a little hotel. We were out of the city. And like, I feel like I didn't get to experience like the country very much or the city very much because we were sort of isolated. This year, we were way more in the city. And it's funny what you just said, because what I walked away from, I almost was like, I am nervous when I left China and people are like, why? And I said, they are so advanced, way beyond stuff that we're doing right now, both in technology, in just lifestyle and stuff. And I mean, it's a very different culture. It's a very different life. That's for sure. And I mean, personally, I mean, I don't know how much time you spent there, but I think like I would have a hard time like living there, you know, for a while. It would definitely take a significant adjustment because it's so different. But you know, like, I mean, 80% of the cars on the road are electric cars now. And they just, I mean, I guess that's they, you know, it's just like they institute, okay, well, we're going to get rid of, you know, this. And they all of a sudden just every car is almost an electric car. Yeah. Boom. And there's all these electric car companies, you know, I mean, and it's kind of fun. I actually love like cars. I like, you know, like following cars and stuff. And, you know, both old and new, but I'm like, there's like 5 companies. I'm like, I've never seen that car. I don't know even that company. And I mean, there's all these new companies, but I mean, that's just an example, but like their drivers, this is another thing that like just blew me away is like they're like Uber, and I forgot what the Uber of China's called. But I could look on my phone right now at the app. But like their app that they have, the drivers in the car, it would show them every light that we were coming up to and exactly how many seconds each light was until it changed green or red, like 10 stoplights ahead. So you could look at like the app and I'd be like, okay, the next stoplight's turning green. And I mean, I was like, that's simple technology, but we don't have that or do that in the United States. But there's just so many things, like you said, I was like blown away, and it almost made me afraid, like for the United States, because I was like, they are instituting technology so quickly right now that is so advanced from like what we're seeing. I was like, who knows what 10 years is going to look like? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was pretty intense.
It's super interesting. Yeah. I went for like a month at one point, and then I would go 2 or 3 times a year for 3 years just to go and visit factories and whatnot. And I will say, from traveling around, like, in China, there was a different types of cultures, even subcultures within China. You go up north, like near Tibet, you know, it's obviously very different than if you go to rural, Shanghai or Ningbo or whatever. But it was pretty crazy. Like even the fashion aspect of it, I was looking at people in 2017, 18, and 19 and like looking at what they were wearing, being like, wow, that's so strange. And I kid you not, like that's the fashion that is now starting to hit our
Exactly.
shores.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I was like, what are we talking about? World leaders. Like we are
yeah.
literally, and even in fashion following them. So I thought that was super fascinating. But yeah,
Yeah,
some of the,
no, totally.
I
Well, and
still
I think
try
that's true
some.
too. Is and one experience I've not had in China is like, and I've been told is rural China is still incredibly rural and incredibly like like I mean, whatever in non-developed, et cetera. And whereas the cities are like incredibly progressive and stuff. But
Yeah.
you could just see life and development, and I mean the speed of things it's pretty fast. Yeah.
Yeah. So changing subject kind
Yeah.
of a little bit here for the more of the closing moments of the conversation, but your demeanor. So obviously you seem to have a great emphasis on empathy, dedication, obviously, but your like kindness comes through, like pretty soft spirited, measured, calculated. Are those foundational principles that you kind of guide yourself with or conduct yourself with? Are those rooted in any type of like spiritual or religious grounding, or is that just something you kind of have adopted out of your own?
I think it's just more of like, a lifestyle. And I would also say it's funny because, I don't know if I would define myself as a kind person, but
I haven't seen you on the track yet with your
yeah,
athletes or
that's right.
something.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, like dealing with athletes, like I would say that like I'm very serious. Like I would say though, like a feedback that's not always a positive feedback that I would get from athletes. It's not kindness, is I'm direct. You know what I mean? I'm pretty straightforward. I mean, I try to be, diplomatic and everything, but I mean, we kind of talked about this before. I'm not going to tell people something that I don't believe just to make them, feel better. I'm normally like, and I can tell them something that's, that's critical or criticism. And I think I am sensitive to that though, like giving people critical feedback, while also, allowing them to see it as like growth as opposed, I'm not the type of coach that's like, what are you doing? That was horrible. And you're never going to be a good athlete. Like, nothing like that, but it's not based on any, like religious or spiritual thing. I think it's just more of, it's just more of, I would say, A, like who I am, but B, just like what I see as valuable to be a good coach, and to be the most effective coach for, certain people. Like I said, I think my athletes that I work with, which just honestly doesn't work for everyone. They know that I have high standards and high expectations, realistic expectations, but high expectations. But I also think that because of that, they understand, like I said, then they understand like what then they want to be, the best in the world, that they're not satisfied with mediocrity, because they know that I'm not. And which I said, some people, maybe that's not the best fit. Like some athletes that might not be the best fit. Because, I am always like looking, but I would say that I do that in a compassionate way and a athlete specific way, with each athlete. And I would say that's what I'm most proud of almost is like, my ability to connect with each athlete in their own way and understand them in their own way, both physiologically and like mentally, spiritually, to get the most out of them and everything. But like I said, it's not like a defined practice. You know what I mean? It's not like I've created even for myself, like hey, this is your philosophy. I think it's just more of a natural, way of doing things. Yeah.
Did you grow up with any of that influence, like religious influence at all?
No, none. Very much not.
Nice.
Yeah, which is
Yeah.
interesting. I mean, I grew up in, like I said, rural Wyoming, and I mean, religion was certainly a piece of a lot of the culture, but not. But I've also I think it's like almost like I would say one of the biggest religions that I've grown up with is like self accountability. Which is interesting. Like it's kind of like the do unto others, like, philosophy more than
Yeah.
anything. And which is, it's just like self accountability. It's like, think about how you're being perceived. Would you want to be treated this way? Would you not want to be treated this way? That type of stuff, as opposed to, and just being like a functional, like, human, a nice, good person, which I mean, it's shocking today, honestly, with, people we deal with, even, in work and industry and like how like sort of non-functional some people are in that way. You know what I mean? And so I'm just like, can't we just be like nice and communicate? Yeah. But
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, go for it.
no, that was all. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me. I always love hearing how people grow up and how it may or may not influence it. But it's interesting also because I've met people whose parents were great people, religious or not. But then there's always like that age of accountability or reason when a kid starts to like make decisions that lead them down one path or the other. And it's always interesting, like whether it's wealth, whether it's religious practice, how they treat others. Sometimes as you raise kids, like they end up kind of going down the optimal path or what you think would be optimal in terms of like living a good life, people talking highly of them. But then other times it's like, what happened?
Yeah.
And you can never, it's like, it's not really throwing the dice because there's choices to be made, but at the same time,
Well,
it's like, well, how do you point?
It's kind of nature and nurture, like you said, too. I always say, and I don't know, like with me, I kind of joke about it. I was like, I feel like I mean, I will attribute this to my parents being good parents, and I didn't realize it at the time. But like I was like, in my life at this point, I've probably had about 5 points where I could have taken the left or the right fork, and for some reason, I always took the correct one. And if I wouldn't have taken the other one, like I said at the beginning of the podcast, like I'd probably be in jail right now. But I also think there is more to it than that and everything. And I think honestly, like I said, part of it is just the way that you're raised ultimately and brought up, and you don't see that stuff happening at the time, but it is the case. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's next for you?
It's a good question. We're actually, it is almost what I would call the off season. Some athletes are in the off season right now. So this time of the year for me is significant planning. It's planning, it's planning the 2026 season. It's signing leases and booking houses for all the different locations that we're going.
Airbnb, yeah.
It's starting to get, with some of the athletes, we have, training or not training race plans, like already like penciled in pretty well. And other ones were like still in that formulation process for the 2026 season. And it's also like actually with some athletes who aren't quite finished, it's like debrief season, like sitting down and like, reviewing this year, and then that starts opening up conversations about how to approach next year.
Yeah.
And everything. But it's like more of a reflective time and a planning time, and which is nice because actually I was listening to a podcast actually with a woman, and I mean my partner listened to it too, and she was talking about how like, and I feel like this time of the year I'm at my clearest, like that I'm at my most like thoughtful and creative because I do have time to sit down and like really, think. And this is when I change things. This is when I write workouts, like almost like a writer. Is like sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll be, and you like have like a workout come to you and I'd be like, I got to get up and go write this down right now.
I think you might be relatively unique in that vein.
Maybe, but like that, this is the time of the year, and it's funny that like just starts happening like organically. I feel like when we're in the middle of the season, like that it's just you're playing the game. So it's also because I know that I've been doing this long enough that it is why this time of the year is such a planning time of the year, because I know that once we hit the ground running, like, those things need to be really set in place, certainly amendable as we go throughout the year. I think that's an important, like, component with both training and just our living situations, et cetera. But it is getting it all set in place now is helpful, because once we get going, like it is really the ball ends up rolling, so, so it's like kind of that reflective and planning time of the year, and which is nice because like I said, I get a little bit more downtime and it's not quite as intensive. And I think the athletes, it's just like the athletes, like they need that like kind of break and reflection time as well. And I mean, I need that as a coach, and I think it's healthy with my athletes to create that like, kind of separation too. Cause some of those people, some of us are like basically together every day, all day of the year. So it's kind of nice to get a little bit of a, space from everyone for everyone to, go into their own whatever recharge mode.
Yeah. One of the biggest things that stuck with me. I don't know why necessarily, but after the first conversation I had with Mark Allen and talking about, overtraining and things like that, and he was saying, there's no one really can define it, but there are these deep wells that you go into and you extract water from these deep wells. And really the only way to kind of refill those wells, and I paraphrase, is like taking extended periods of time off where like it's a mental, spiritual, physical thing where you just kind of refill those cisterns so that you can begin to draw from those again. But then hopefully as they fill up, they kind of widen as well. So yeah, that was something he said to me along those lines. It just stuck with me.
It's funny because I like that like metaphor. What I always tell my athletes, or this is like even what I'd write in Training Peaks, and I'd be like, this period is for recharging your mental and physical batteries. Because that's what I'm basically like, you are plugging in right now. And we want, once we get rolling again, I want both of those things to be at 100%, Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's like, Ryan, the Mark Allen comparison. Yeah. You want that well full when you start digging into it again.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for taking the time. Glad I was able to get you on and make it happen. But my knowledge base has been enriched by it, but just hearing your experience. So I appreciate you taking the time to share with me, obviously, but then also anyone who listens.
Yeah, no, great. Yeah, it was great chatting with you. And hopefully we got some valuable stuff out of this.
Oh, I'm sure we did. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you so much to Ryan for coming on the show. Really good conversation, especially around the physiology, head, heart concept, kind of the 3 points that he does a lot of his coaching through. I think at the end of the day, like everyone, no matter your level of physiology, head or your heart, it's good to be aware of those just so that you can kind of rise the ship with all the tides of those different elements and verticals when it comes to the way that we think, the way that we feel, and the way that we operate physically. Really great conversation. Make sure to check out all of the different stuff that Ryan has going on from his coaching platform. And then obviously, the USA Triathlon Director of High Performance. Be on the lookout for John Reed and some of these guys that he's working with as they look forward to LA 2028 and beyond. Really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much for letting me ramble. And if you have any suggestions for future guests you think that I should have on, please feel free to send me a message on the Instagram or leave a comment. All right. Thank you guys so much. And I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.